This is the Bat Flip Podcast. Now here's your host, Damian, David, and Matt.
Hey everybody, and welcome into another edition of our season preview series on the Bat Flip Podcast. I'm Matt here today with Damian, and we are going to talk about the Toronto Blue Jays. So, a team that has been a contender the last few years. They have been stuck in a little bit of free agent madness, where they've tried to sign some of the top free agents and have finished second a bunch of times. And they're still trying to be in a contention window. But we'll see how well they're doing at that. So, Damian, guess we'll start off by just what do you think the state of the Toronto Blue Jays right now is, and where do you think they're headed?
Yeah, I think the Blue Jays are in another kind of weird, precarious spot too. I mean, you kind of heard this here the last couple episodes of these, but the Blue Jays have been another team that have struggled to attract people to come to Toronto. They finally got one in Santander this offseason and Max Scherzer, but they've been in on high profile free agents. They lost out on Shohei Ohtani, they lost out on Juan Soto. And there's been some other, Corbin Burns didn't want to go there. They had a big offer for him. So they're in a weird kind of spot. And, they're going to be heading into an era here where Vlad Jr. is going to be a free agent. They weren't able to get an extension done with him. Bo Bichette's going to be a free agent after this upcoming season. So it's going to be really interesting to see where the Blue Jays do this. But I do think they have a solid team for the 2025 season, at least.
Yeah, I think it is going to be a pretty decent team. But as you mentioned, this whole thing going forward could end up sinking pretty rapidly for them if they don't make the right decisions.
Yeah.
I don't think it's unsalvageable. The Blue Jays do have a pretty decent amount of money to spend. We've seen it the last couple off seasons with them trying to spend on Juan Soto this past offseason and last year on Ohtani. But I do think that um, I do think there's a chance they can work out extensions in the offseason, just signing them as free agents,
Yeah.
basically, to a big contract. Because I don't think that Vlad Jr. necessarily dislikes being in Toronto, but I think that the money just didn't line up this offseason, and they kind of want to wait and see how this season goes. So we'll see what ends up happening there. The farm system's not fantastic. It's got some cool pieces in it, but it's not, it's not something that's going to sustain a contender for the next few years. So um, definitely an interesting spot for this team, and I guess we'll get into starting talking about what they did this offseason and look at who they added and subtracted from the roster. They added Yimi Garcia, pretty good veteran reliever, been around a bit. It's been solid. He's got a pretty good projection this year. Jeff Hoffman was one of their big ads. He was a late inning reliever for the Phillies last year. Had a great year. His projection is extremely good this year. A lot of teams lined up to sign him. The one concern there is that he had failed his physical where he had tried to sign with two other teams earlier in the offseason. And then the Blue Jays signed him. And we found out that he had failed physicals. So is he going to be healthy? I think that, the Blue Jays feel like he is. And there's no limitations on him at this point. So hopefully he's able to stay healthy. Anthony Santander, you mentioned him in the beginning here. He signed a pretty big contract. Brought him over from a division rival in the Orioles. So good power bat, something that they haven't really had too much of the last couple of years in the corner outfield. And then Max Scherzer. We'll see what happens. We talked in the last episode. We did the San Francisco Giants. We talked about Justin Verlander. Max Scherzer maybe to a slightly less of a level as Verlander. We're going to see what happens with him because he's 40 years old and
Yeah.
he's just. We don't know if he's cooked or if he's been injured and could have another healthy year. There are some better signs for Max Scherzer this year than there are for Justin Verlander, but it'll be interesting to see what he does. They traded for Andres Jimenez, which is a really interesting deal. He has a pretty good projection this year as well. Very good defender. We'll see if he's able to put up a decent offensive season. He's been inconsistent there, but he's had some really big years. They brought in Nick Sandlin and Miles Straw here to kind of close out this their off season, and it's an interesting team with their additions. They wanted to hit on like a superstar free agent, but they ended up adding a bunch of guys to their roster that are all pretty mid-level to higher mid-level free agents here. So, Damian, I guess just in your opinion, with this offseason for them, did they add that all these ads in total, or did they come close to being what could have been added with just adding one superstar, or do you think that they just needed to do more here?
I don't think it comes close to becoming with one superstar. I think we could see that a guy like the caliber of a Shohei Otani and or even a Juan Soto, they can do a lot for your team, especially Shohei. I mean, nobody knew he was going to have the type of season that he had this last year, and especially now with him going to be able to do pitching. But um, I think they made some good ads here. I think you'll see the argument is that there still could be some more ads that should have been made there, but I think they did a decent job overall of trying to maximize what they had at the time while also giving the fact that they were going after high level free agents, right? It's not
Yeah.
often that you go after big name high level free agents and are still able to walk away with, you know, 4 to 5 ball players that can contribute to your team in a meaningful manner, which they did that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's definitely important that, a lot of teams miss out on a star and they don't pivot really. And this team really did pivot and added some pieces to really help them this year. But I guess moving on, we'll talk about what they've got here in their position player core. You've got, obviously, we talked a little bit about Santander in left field, bringing him in. You've got Luke's in center. I think that's kind of up in the air. They've
Yeah.
also got Joey Loperfido there as well. Neither one of them are great options. Um, you got George Springer. We'll see what happens with George Springer this year. He's been a really solid player for a long time. He was a really good player for the Astros, and then since he's come over, he's been pretty solid, but he's been injured a lot. So we'll see if he's able to have a healthy year. He is 35 years old too, so that's definitely something to look out for. Um, then on the infield, you've got obviously Vlad Jr. is the star of this team. There's a lot of conversation about him right now with the extension talks that they had and fell through. But he's going to be there this year unless something crazy happens. So definitely had a bounce back last year from what was a pretty abysmal 2023 season for him. We talked about Andres Jimenez a little bit coming in from Cleveland in that trade. Definitely a piece for this team to kind of shore up that middle infield and really help them defensively next to Bo Bichette, who has been a good offensive player for most of his career. Defense, not so much. So having a good defender next to him will help. And Bo Bichette also, coming off a year where he was pretty bad. I mean, there's really no way to put it any differently. He was pretty terrible last year. 71 WRC plus, and we'll see what he ends up doing because he was very consistently a really good offensive player the 3 years before that. So then you got Ernie Clement is kind of a fill in at third base, I guess. Doesn't strike out much, which is interesting. But and Alejandro Kirk behind the plate. A pretty solid catcher, definitely offensively a very good catcher. We'll see if he's able to put up another good offensive season this year, how the defense plays. And then you've got Wagner in the DH spot right there. Dalton Varsho could be in any of these spots, probably in the outfield at once he's fully healthy. I believe he is healthy again now,
Yeah,
so he probably will. Yeah,
it's still up in the air if he's going to be ready for opening day.
right.
I think the manager said he was likely to miss opening day. He's played some spring games since then, so it's kind of up in the air if he's going to be ready for center field. I think that's also where he's going to play is
Yeah,
center. Um, but yeah, I Varsho I think is going to miss opening day, but it should be right around there if
gotcha.
he does.
Gotcha. Yeah, so definitely an interesting piece to throw into the equation there. Kind of adds like it's a fairly deep lineup.
Yeah,
You've got, I guess your low once you add in Varsho, your lowest projected player will be like a 1.4 WAR, which we've seen in our previous episodes here that there's usually a player that's like less than one or something. There's just a
yeah.
black hole somewhere in that lineup, and this one doesn't really have a black hole. So I guess, but looking at what they've got here, which of these players, I guess, out of Bo Bichette and Vlad Jr., I guess I'll ask out for Bo Bichette. Do you think he's going to bounce back? Because that's a huge deal for this team.
Yeah, I very much think Bo Bichette's going to bounce back. I think I think he dealt with most of his injuries last year, and I just think it really hampered last season. I think he tried to play through some stuff. I think he's fully healthy. If you've watched so far in spring, he's looked really good. Um, so I am on the Bo Bichette is going to be back train for 2025 pretty easily. I'm probably right near the front of that.
Yeah, I have some reservations about his game, but I definitely think there's a good chance that he's going to be. I think he'll be at least a league average hitter. I mean,
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't
I
know
think
that
so.
he's going to put up those 125 WRC plus seasons that he had been putting up for his whole career. But I think he's going to at least be an above average hitter. And we'll see how the defense plays at shortstop. Last year was actually the best value they've gotten out of him defensively, which is interesting,
Yeah.
considering the abysmal offensive season he had. And as you mentioned, he dealt with the injuries. He only played 81 games, so it's roughly half a season. And I know in 2023 he also had a really slow start, if I remember correctly, and poured it on in the second half. So definitely interesting player there. And then out of these other guys, I guess I feel like Santander, you kind of know what you got. Vlad Jr., you kind of know what you got. Jimenez, you kind of know what you got. Out of the Clement, Wagner, do you see any of these guys kind of stepping up for them?
Yeah, Wagner, I think is a really interesting one. That's actually Billy Wagner's son.
I didn't even
Um,
realize that.
yeah, that's Will Wagner. He's Billy Wagner's son. He had a good little bit of run last year. He got in 24 games. He had a 125 WRC plus there, hit 305, had point 0.6 WAR there, and didn't even look so overmatched. I mean, he was striking out under 20% of the time. Didn't have a high walk rate, just around 5%, but I think him getting a full time spot there, or at least maybe a platoon style side there. I'm excited to see what Wagner could do for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned Wagner. He had a um, he has a very good projections this year from all the projection systems. So not necessarily defensively, but from an offensive standpoint, a rookie having a or somebody with only 24 games of big league experience having a 116 to 120 WRC plus projection is pretty solid. So I like him as well. We the bench here. It's not too much to talk about there. Davis Schneider is kind of interesting. 2023 had a really good 35 game cup of coffee in the big leagues where everyone was expecting him to be this really good player. And last year it played him into a everyday role for the most part and not great. So we'll see what
Yeah.
he is. I'm sure he's probably somewhere in between there, but maybe he'll bounce back a little bit from 2024. The rest of those guys, Heineman, backup catcher, the other Jimenez is I don't really know much about him, and then Miles Straw, defensive fourth outfielder. Definitely somebody you'd like to have if Varsho's going to play center because you just don't know. He hadn't played there before in Toronto, so you'd like to have that extra guy that can play some really good defense. So, any more thoughts on the position players from you, Damien?
Not really much. Just wanted to hit Leo Jimenez is a like utility infielder, second base, shortstop type guy. Played 63 games for them last year. Had a 102 WRC plus, point 0.64. So a little strikeout way too often, but yeah, just want to say who he was. So
Yeah,
yeah,
there you go.
turn around.
Yep. All right. Well, I guess we'll move on now to the pitchers for the Toronto Blue Jays, and this is a spot where they've got some veteran guys who have had really good careers, but we don't know how well they're going to sustain those careers going forward into 2025. They're all pretty old. In fact, with the exception of their five starter, who right now is listed as Bowden Francis, but they got several candidates for that. Every single one of them is on the wrong side of 30, and three of them are over 34. So Kevin Gossman has been a very, very, very successful free agent signing for Toronto. He's put up some great seasons there. Um, you know, he in 2024 put up his worst season he had put up in like 5 years. And he's getting up there in age a little bit. He's still eating a ton of innings. I still like him, but we'll see if he's able to continue his success into 2025. Jose Barrios has had a lot of ups and downs with the Blue Jays. He's had a couple of decent years. Last year, the ERA was really good, but he had a really poor metrics last year. His strikeout rate was the lowest of his career. Um, he had a little bit of fortune on batted balls last year to help him out, but um, he's kind of not really the same guy that they had in Minnesota back in the early part of his career. But he's still a solid pitcher mid rotation. Chris Bassett is kind of the same thing. I mean, as these first two, he's kind of getting up there in age. He's 36. He's been a pretty good signing for them. Has had a couple of decent years, but he's just kind of like you kind of count on him as like a four starter maybe. And then you get to Max Scherzer, and we just do not know what he's going to be. He's dealt with injuries the last couple of years. He's had back problems, which is pretty significant. Um, his stuff has seemed to stay to stay to a certain level. It seems like he's aged a little bit better than Verlander over the last couple of years. When Verlander's pitched, his stuff has just not been there. He's been getting hit around. When Scherzer's pitched, he's still been decent. And you look at last year, he had around a 4 ERA in 43 innings. 2023, which was split between the Mets and the Rangers, he had a 3.77 ERA. There's still a lot of swing and miss there. Um, the projections seem to like him fairly well, so it'll be interesting to see what they get out of him, and also how much he's going to pitch this year. If he's going to be able to put up 150 innings, that could be a big win for them. If he's putting up 100 innings or less, then we'll see. And then you got the five starter, Bowden Francis. I don't think Alek Manoah can come back this year. He had Tommy John surgery last year in June, so I'm assuming he probably won't be back. Maybe he could be back in September or October.
Yeah.
But if they're in contention, we're starting to get into those teams where the Tommy John guys might try to push to come back if they can. But we don't know what Alek Manoah would really be, anyways, if he does come back, because he's been so inconsistent throughout his career. But I guess out of the starting rotation, you got any thoughts, Damien? I think out of Scherzer and Gossman and Bassett, which one of these older guys do you think is gonna be have a really good season? And do you think any of them are just kind of falling off?
Yeah, I think Gossman is probably the easy one to say that he could have the best season. He's the youngest of them all. I think he has the best. The stuff still looks the best. I mean, Scherzer is good, but you could tell his stuff's kind of taken a little bit of a step back, and the injury concern is still real there. Where Gossman, I think the splitter, I mean, that's going to play for so long with the movement he gets on it and pairs it with his fastball and stuff. So I like Gossman. I'm a bigger Jose Barrios fan than most other people. I think you could say that he's always been someone who's consistently outperformed his metrics. And even last year, he had I think it was a career high home run rate to fly ball rate. I think it was like up over 15%, which if that gets knocked down just a little bit, which I wonder if the new configuration of Rogers Center has anything to do with that. But yeah, I just Bassett, and I think he's just a solid guy at this point. I think he's better suited to be more of like a 4 or 5 starter than a 3 starter. You could make the argument if Scherzer's all the way back, he technically could probably be like the 2 or the 3. So it just kind of middling there. I think the starting rotation is fine. I think it has some upside if guys are healthy, but that is a concern.
Yeah, I'm with you. A couple guys, I guess, just to kind of mention here, that could factor in prospects to know, and maybe another guy or two. You've got Jake Bloss, who is a top 100 prospect. Definitely somebody that could factor in this year. He's been in AAA. Ricky Tiedemann has dealt with injuries again. We don't really know what he's going to be because of the amount of injuries he's dealt with, but he's hoping to come back sometime this year. So if he's able to, then that would be fantastic news, and he could provide a boost. The talent is definitely there with him. You got Adam Klofenstein, who's kind of an interesting AAA arm at this point. Had a pretty good year, or he was brought over from St. Louis. And then I want to mention also Ryan Yarborough's here. He's been a pretty long time big leaguer. been with several different teams, so adds a little bit of depth. But I guess looking over at the bullpen here, you got Jeff Hoffman came in to close. We talked about him a little bit earlier. Definitely had a very good year last year for the Phillies, and he's expected to have a good year again this year. Chad Green, Yimi Garcia, Eric Swanson, Nick Sandlin, Brendan Little, Tommy Nance, and Yariel Rodriguez. And that's the guy that I want to keep an eye on. But Damien, which one of these guys? Obviously, Hoffman is the closer if he's healthy, really good. Which one of these
Yeah.
other guys do you see maybe stepping up and being in that like setup role and having some success here?
Yeah, I mean, Chad Green, Yimi Garcia, I think they're solid veterans that are going to be there. Yimi Garcia's had a ton of success in Toronto before. I like Eric Swanson a lot. His metrics when he was with sorry, not St. Louis, Seattle looked really good. He struggled a little bit since coming over to Toronto, but I still think he has good stuff. Sandlin could be a solid reliever, but I think, like you mentioned, Yario Rodriguez is kind of the real X factor. Could be into that starting rotation pretty easily. You could see him become. I think his stuff could play up to be a pretty good relief pitcher at the end of it. But yeah, I think that's kind of where it's at. And I wanted to talk about Hoffman real quick because we did. There was the worry about the physical concerns, but both of those teams were trying to sign him to be a starter.
Yeah,
Or at least some sort of like a hey, we're going to push you out to be a starter, and then if it fails, you could be a bullpen arm. So I think the Blue Jays have basically considered, hey, you're just going to be a full time that you're basically going to be our closer,
close.
da 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 da. And I think there's less risk and concern there with that. So I like that deal overall as a closer. You can manage it a lot better than you can as a starter. So I'm not worried about that deal or Hoffman at all.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm not super worried about the physical since he's staying in the bullpen.
Yeah.
But yeah, I did want to touch just a little bit more on Yariel Rodriguez. I remember in 2023 watching him in the very first game of the World Baseball Classic, and I was
Yeah.
like, man, this guy's nasty. He's pitching
Hmm.
for Team Cuba, and all of a sudden you see him get signed by the Blue Jays, and you're like, oh boy, this guy might end up being something. And he was pretty good last year
Solid.
for a rookie. Had a 4.47 ERA, but he started all 21 games that he pitched in. So I think moving him to the bullpen, his stuff could really play up in the bullpen. So that'll be something to look out for this year. But I guess we'll move on and look at the outlook here. In 2025, the over/under win total is 78.5. Damien, you taking the over or under on that?
I think I'm going to take the over. I think this is going to be a team that is going to hit right around that 80, 81 wins mark, going to be right around 500. And I think they have plenty of ways that could happen. The Bo Bichette bounce back, getting Santander in there, a couple of their younger guys playing as well, being better defensively. Pitching, I think, is going to be a key for them too. So I'm going to take over the 78 and a half.
Yeah, I think I might take the over here too. Some of these other teams in this division, I think maybe take a little bit of a step back. Look at the Rays a little bit. I know they weren't great last year, but I'm not a huge believer in them. We'll talk about them again here in a little bit. I don't. I don't really believe in the Yankees that much, honestly. I mean, last year I was a big believer in them. I don't know about the Yankees. I don't know. It feels like you've got some guys here, like Bo Bichette's not going to put up an 80 WRC plus or 70 or whatever it was. Again, like he's going to be better than that.
Yeah.
You look at some of these guys are probably going to stay a little bit healthier. Like you'd like to think George Springer he's still been good when he plays for the most part. You'd like to think he could have a somewhat pretty healthy season, and I don't know. It's hard to say. I guess we'll see. We'll see what happens here, but I'm probably going to take the over on that. The odds to make the postseason plus 285. They're pretty good long shot there, but not impossible. Odds to win the AL East with the way the top of this division is, they're pretty big long shots for that. Plus 1,500 and odds to win the World Series plus 6,000. They are the best odds for the World Series that we've had so far, but you got to kind of consider like there's a lower chance this team gets in, but this team's pretty talented and they could beat teams from other divisions that are that get in because the division's weak. So I'm definitely interested in this team. There's a world where this team works out this year and has a good year, makes the playoffs, makes a deep run in the playoffs. But I think it's fairly unlikely. I believe this is the first AL East team we've done so far, right?
I believe
So, I
so.
mean, based on World Series odds, they're projected to be the worst team in the division, which is kind of crazy because this team's pretty good.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll that's yet to be seen how it turns out. But any final thoughts for you, Damien?
No, I think we pretty much hit it. It's going to be interesting to see how the whole AL East goes, and if they're able to do something, if this team's good and that, but if they're bad, I wonder at the deadline if they
Yeah.
could be some big
Oh,
time
Vlad. Oh,
players.
yeah. Big
Yeah.
time.
So
So, all right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe. We appreciate your support, and we'll catch you on the next one.